Wow, we've nearly made it right through our series, and it's only now that we get down to the real nitty-gritty of the book of Revelation and the doctrine of Christ. Now, since the moment that Jesus spoke to Pilate and said, "I am the king of all those who love the truth," it became clear that the great conflict on earth had already been simplified in the mind of Christ to a Persian-like dualistic choice between light and darkness, truth and lie. In the answer of Jesus to Pilate, there is an inference in the words of Jesus that the world is filled only with those who love the lie or those who love the truth. There is no middle ground. In the book of Revelation, the choice is between following the Lamb or following the harlot. The citizens of God dwell on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, while the citizens of the world live in Babylon. There are no other places to live. Now, the armies of Babylon are identified as Gog and Magog, which in Revelation 20 have transmuted into the nations extending to the four corners of the world, and are no longer just the Russian tribes from the north of Israel. The armies of the north of Israel, were in any case also identified, religiously speaking, with the worshippers of Baal. That is, the armies to the peoples to the north of Israel were in general worshippers of Baal. Now, each of the two symbolic cities, Jerusalem and Babylon, has its own particular character. Babylon is a huge financial capital. It is a lawmaker, an enforcer of its laws in all its territories, and the provider of wealth and protection as well for those who are submissive to its dictates. Its citizens are fully involved in the pursuit of the material things in life of leisure and luxury. They pay their taxes to the state and to the ruling class who bask in the city's success. Jerusalem, by contrast, is a holy city, a religious city, a temple city, full of priests and worshippers, illuminated from within by the glory of God. Now, God's call to the saints who are still entrapped in Babylon is the same as his call to Lot before the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. He commands them to come out of her, for she is marked for destruction. He's not just saying, don't sin, but also, if you can think of the modern context, stop trying to make all of that money. Now, the beast is the state, whose figureheads are the world's kings throughout the centuries. The pharaohs, the kings and Caesars of Egypt, of Assyria, of Babylon, of Persia, of Greece, of Rome, and later again, the Catholic popes. And the Catholic popes themselves, in a way, are the figureheads of rich European families who are after the same things that all the great families of the past were also after: wealth and power. The apocalyptic Babylon incorporates all historical empires and their shared vision for a utopian world empire. Their aspirations may be high, but their venture flies in the face of the fact that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. They may stamp order onto chaos, but the order they impose is not the same as God's order. Only the kingdom of God is a legitimate one. The final apocalyptic choices are, therefore, the kingdom of Christ or the kingdom of the beast. It's going to be either Jerusalem or Babylon. Which city will you choose? In this study, we will look at the two entities a little more closely and try and identify what it is, essentially, that determines whether someone is a citizen of Jerusalem or a citizen of Babylon. And this includes the question of whether it's possible, in fact, to successfully be a citizen of both. So our topic is the tale of two apocalyptic cities, Babylon and Jerusalem. Now, as we have stated on several occasions already, Jerusalem in the Apocalypse should be understood as a symbol for all believers in Jehovah and his Messiah, Jesus Christ. Or, as St. Augustine would have described it, it is the heavenly city of God. Anything equivalent, such as Camp of the Saints or Holy City, still actually refers to the church, although Camp of the Saints is more of an allusion to the church as wanderers in the wilderness of the world, while Holy City is more of an allusion to the church as an established and very public institution. The Israel of the New Covenant is not the Israel of the Old. Paul indicates that the borders of Israel swell to include into its fold the other believers in Israel's Messiah, who become a peculiar kind of Jew as well. Now Jesus, for his part, spoke of the Jews who opposed him, as if he was somehow not one of them, as if they were somehow an unfortunate inclusion into his nation, foreign to the purposes of God. Believers in the Messiah, for Paul in the book of Galatians, are the true circumcised of God and the true Jews, and therefore genuinely Israel. And Paul speaks here, of course, from a context of the New Covenant, and he's setting the old Israel against God's new work. In terms of Paul's discussion and analogy at Romans 11, the Gentile believers are grafted into those promises that define Israel, while some of the natural Israelites have been cut out for failing to receive the prophets of God, including Christ. And what is left over is both a redefined Israel and all Israel. It is the stiff-necked religious leaders of Israel who battle against the Messiah who are the first to be cut out of the olive tree, to give place to more worthy branches of Gentile believers. Paul does not say it, but the place of those cut out is no longer with Israel, but with the Gentiles. And so we can make the sort of loose identification, which is 90% accurate, I suppose, that Jerusalem in the Apocalypse has the same meaning as the Holy City, which has the same meaning as the Camp of the Saints. The question of who Israel is goes with the issue of who it is exactly that will be worshipping Jehovah in Ezekiel's temple. Now, if that temple is literal and in the future and for Judaic Israel, then it is also a place of worship for the Christian, or one would hope so. Ezekiel's temple is located in a world where dead waters are healed. The wilderness blooms, and Israel is in spiritual perfection. Israel is then ruled by its holy prince, who presumably is the Messiah. This may be well and good in a worldview that understands the millennium as literal and has the saints resurrected before this temple is ever built. But in a worldview that understands the millennium as symbolic of the church's mission here and now, the temple cannot be literal, nor its role as a Judaic edifice. It would then have to become a symbol and would describe the spiritual perfection of what has been accomplished by the work of Christ and within the context of the New Covenant. The prince would still be the Messiah, but Paul has already explained that the priesthood of Aaron has been folded up and a Melchizedekan priesthood put in its place. It is the spiritual perfection of the Melchizedek ministry that is entrusted with the Great Commission under the New Covenant. Spiritual Jerusalem is that union of Messianic Jews and Gentile believers who serve Israel's Jehovah under the Messianic leadership of Jesus of Nazareth. So Ezekiel's temple city, found in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48, describes a perfect spiritual state. The temple vision of Ezekiel's final chapters, that's 40 through 48, speaks of a holy nation under its Messiah. It has a perfect and, in a sense, upgraded redemptive system. and it serves as an image of Christian redemption and of the church in the world. Christianity is more than an add-on, however, even if this is how Paul pictures it in his Romans 11 narrative. By picturing the church as inhabiting the very sanctuary, that is, the inner sanctum of God's temple, and as being in some ways the very temple of God itself, and not some second or separate temple, God promotes the followers of Christ just as he once promoted Isaac and Israel. God does not always choose the firstborn. And if he can find a way to give his blessing to the secondborn, he will do so. Both Isaac and Jacob, that is, Israel, were secondborn, and God even promoted Jesse's youngest son David to the throne, after the people, for their part, had chosen regal-looking Saul. Nor was David deterred from playing the role of priest, even though he was not from the tribe of Levi. And even from David's offspring, David's firstborn did not become the ancestor of the Messiah. The persons that God chooses to place at the center of his affairs can be quite different to the people chosen by men. God stays in control, and systems that stand to thwart God's prophetic utterances are only lining themselves up for destruction. For example, God's promise to Abraham included a promise to bless all nations through his messianic seed. But under the system created by rabbinical Israel at about the time of the Maccabean Revolution, and where all things Greek were despised in Israel, the promise of sharing Israel's blessings with the Goyim had virtually no chance of being fulfilled. Rather, Israel's hope had mutated into a belief that the Messiah must descend from heaven, supernaturally empower the nation, and use the nation to subjugate the Gentiles from sea to sea. Having completed this subjugation, Israel could convey Abraham's blessing to their subjects. This myth of subjugating nations still drives the murderous error of the Khazarian Jews, who drive the program of the Illuminati. Of course, Jesus didn't see it this way at all, and his first mission to Israel was high priestly, and involved establishing the blood redemption of Israel, and only after which he received divine authority to rule the nations. Yet, having received this authority, he still did not choose to subjugate the Gentiles, but sent his disciples to the four corners of the earth to share the good news that salvation from God had appeared in Zion, and that all nations could now know Israel's blessing of Abraham. To rub it in, the Holy Spirit falling on the Gentiles was the sign that God was willing to sideline the scornful Jews, and would, despite them, begin extending the blessing of Abraham to the Gentile nations. The holy temple of Revelation 11 is another picture of the church, which has now become the spiritual heart of Judaism. Those who spiritually are Gentiles, and for the Jew that means all unbelievers, and for the Christian that would mean nominal believers, who are spiritually Gentiles. These Gentiles are described as trampling the outer courts. They've come to the temple, but they have not progressed to the inner sanctum, that is, to the deeper truth. These Gentiles would only defile the inner courts if they entered. This is also alluded to in the word trampling in Revelation 11, which describes their presence even in the outer court. They are unfocused on God and milling about. They have not advanced to the meaningful spirituality of the inner court. God says of the outer court, measure it not. That is, do not count these among the believers. The problem with the merger of weak believers and strong believers is that most of the persecution that comes to the stronger, more radical saints comes from their weak-minded brethren. Many persecutions come from well-meaning Christians who oppose and denounce the more devout believers as being extreme and unbalanced. They believe they are serving God by censuring them, but they are really serving the purposes of the evil one. The physical trampling down of Israel as a nation has its antitype in the general persecution of the saints, who commonly have their religious beliefs and ministries trampled on. Trampling of religion could include such things as prohibition on public evangelism and worship. It could mean enforced closure of churches, or perhaps even the repurposing of churches for secular uses. And it could certainly mean also in the media the public ridiculing of religion. Yet at one level, the work of God always goes on, under one stricture or another. Being persecuted and opposed in the mission of Christ only draws in more supernatural intervention. It also draws the church closer to Christ and to the power of his resurrection that Paul rejoiced in. It is a power that breaks free of all constraints. The people without a temple cannot be desecrated in the way that rabbinical Israel would be desecrated, merely by the placement of some idol in their temple. There is little that can be done to dismantle an institution that does not rely on buildings and money to accomplish its works. The work of the church remains undesecrated no matter what the circumstance. The heathen cannot enter into the inner sanctum of God to desecrate it if they cannot physically locate it. Now the saints remain in the inner sanctum, that is, in God's presence, and avoid becoming spiritually desecrated by compromising public constraints. So let's summarize those points again. The work of God always goes on under one stricture or another. Being opposed in the mission of Christ only draws in more supernatural intervention. It also draws the church closer to Christ and to the power of his resurrection. It is a power that breaks free of all constraints. There is little that can be done to dismantle an institution that does not rely on buildings and money to accomplish its work. The work of the church remains undesecrated no matter what the circumstance. The heathen cannot enter into the inner sanctum of God to desecrate it. And as in Eden, the angels of God protect the inner sanctum from intruders. Now the New Jerusalem is described as having 12 foundations and 12 gates. The city represents the Gentile church and all Messianic Jews who look for the salvation of God proclaimed by Jesus Christ. This is the one new man that we spoke of right at the beginning of this series. The dimensions of the city are 12,000 cubits, square and high. Its square shape is a symbol of universal power, just as also it was for Babylon. The square speaks, of course, of the earth, and the church is located throughout the earth, just as Babylon is. Its walls face the 4 compass points of the earth. And the square is the Greek Platonic symbol for the world and for mankind. Under ancient Egyptian reckoning, where each cubit represents a month, this 12,000 cubits stands for 12,000 months. Now, in the ideal calendar of 12 months per year, 12,000 months is the same as 1,000 years. And the New Jerusalem will therefore stand for 1,000 years, which agrees with the symbol of a millennium of divine rule. The penitent can enter by the 12 gates. If the New Jerusalem is exercising its dominion now and not in the future, it behoves us to know what we can do about it. First of all, let's consider it to be the spiritual embodiment of all that Ezekiel's third temple promises to be. New Jerusalem is part of the new heavens and new earth, and these realities are also present in the millennium, in fact, in the current day. They're not waiting for the future fulfillment. The Gospel Commission therefore operates within such a spirit-regenerated world. The ministry of reconciliation given to the church brings about this new world. Christ sits at the right-hand side of God until the time of restitution of all things. The church is in many ways the legal arm of heaven. It is empowered to bind and release from sin. It is empowered to exercise authority over demons and sickness. It is empowered to bring about the amnesty of God to sinners. The New World prophecies about the highways to Egypt and Assyria being opened up indicates that Israel can now be reconciled with its old enemies. The gospel does allow people to lay aside old enmities, in particular also the enmity of man toward God. The wolf lying with the lamb is also as much a political statement as a nice figure of speech. The lamb is Israel, and its enemies are the wolf pack. The promised longevity and health of Israel's citizens speaks of the joy associated with their prosperous and healthy lives. It is a human utopia that stands for the spiritual utopia that is achieved through unity in the Spirit. The new world established under the new covenant is one free of the old rehearsals for the altar and the blood and the many washings of temple life. It is free of the fear of mistakes made by the ministers of the tabernacle before God. Galatians 4:26-27 speaks of this new Jerusalem. It says that the Jerusalem that is above is free and is the mother of us all. As first mother, heavenly Jerusalem is the spiritual ideal that the saints seek to model in the earth. Like Mount Zion in its origin, it is a city-state. It is the perfect heavenly form of the kingdom of God that saints work to establish on the earth. As the kingdom of God, it begins to establish the paradise of God. Departed saints already live in its glory and bear witness to what is still transpiring upon the earth. Paul speaks of the great crowd of witnesses that testify to us from history and from heaven of their own victory of faith. I think in some ways they are also witnesses in some way of what we are doing on the earth, cheering us on to greater and greater things, and to stand upon their own witness and to become one with them. Christ sits in the midst of them all as the ultimate hero of faith. He is king already in the kingdom of heaven, and trying to demonstrate the reality of this heavenly kingdom through his church to those on the earth. The doctrine of Christ therefore offers the saints elements of paradise on earth. The 12 foundations and the 12 gateways of the city seem to be identified with foundational truths and gateways to understanding. These are established through the 12 areas of apostolic instruction in the New Testament. And perhaps you've never recognized these foundations before, so here they are. Foundation number 1, the book of Romans. Foundation number 2, 1 and 2 Corinthians. Foundation number 3, Galatians. Foundation 4, Ephesians. Foundation 5, Philippians. Foundation 6, Colossians and Philemon. Foundation 7, 1 and 2 Thessalonians. Foundation 8, 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus. Foundation 9, Hebrews. Foundation 10, James. Foundation 11, 1 and 2 Peter and Jude. Foundation 12, 1, 2 and 3 John. Notice that the book of Acts and the Gospels are not included because they're historical, and also the book of Revelation is prophetic. These 12 books, these 12 sets of books, lay down the foundation of Christian life and understanding, and therefore they become the foundation of the spiritual city. So that is Jerusalem, and saints are its citizens and living ambassadors. Their role in the world, until the city has fully alighted upon the earth, is to spread the good news that New Jerusalem is still taking new citizens. The only requirement for citizenship is to come redeemed in the blood of the Lamb. Of course, the city is holy, and its inhabitants are also holy. Anyone that is not holy in some way, any kind of deceiver, or thief, or adulterer, or idolater, or murderer, or occultists, can only look at the city but never enter it. And I speak here of Revelation 22:15. Unredeemed sinners are forever banned from the tree of life, which restores immortality to those within. Those that live within are not just considered through imputation to be righteous through the blood of Christ, but also truly love righteousness and both fear and hate the consequences of sin. God is in the process of making his saints ever more righteous, transforming them to become like Christ. Because the saints suffer for the truth and love God and their fellow man, they fulfill the commandments of God and are considered righteous. Christ's suffering has brought them face to face with sin and its consequences, and they have turned away from sin. And in the resurrection, any remaining vestiges of their sin nature will be destroyed, and they will in every way become righteous forever. The symbols expressing this transformation are destruction in the lake of fire of the fallen angels, the two beasts, the dragon, and death itself. Sin will be destroyed at its source, and for good. And in so doing, creation will be fully redeemed and transformed to such a degree that it cannot fall back into sin ever again. But what then of that other city which sets itself up in opposition to God's great city, and is the antithesis and counterfeit of all these things? That other great apocalyptic city is Great Babylon. It is also called Sodom in Egypt in Revelation 11, and we've investigated this to some degree already. Now, Babylon, in being the most beautiful city of the ancient world, was a humanistic attempt to create a city that could be called the City of God. Its temples, one of which was the rebuilt Tower of Babel, were to be the gateways of God and centers of divination. Babylon becomes a symbol for all human societies that attempt to create a human utopia to rival the glory promised in the New Jerusalem. Now, like all royal cities, Babylon too was square in its layout, and it had a great central temple. The chief god was the god of mysteries and all religious interpretation, Bel. The name Bel means, approximately, interpreter. Golden idols and adornments stood in the gateways to the sanctuaries of the lesser gods, and probably within the temple of Bel itself. The coffins of the kings found at Uruk contain many small but solid gold amulets and gold statues, showing that gold was abundant. A river, namely the Euphrates, ran through the city, lined with trees, and there were hanging gardens, which were all possibly attempting to replicate the glories of the Garden of Eden. Eden too had many gardens, and it had a river running through its midst, with trees alongside. Now the city had great gateways on all sides, and a river passed in and out of two of the sides of the city. So in so many ways it was a human replica of the New Jerusalem. But its God was not the God of creation, Jehovah, but the God of all divination, Bel, whose name would be different in all countries into which Babylon's influence later extended. In the apocalyptic overthrow of Babylon, there is more than an overthrow of the world system. There is the casting down of every human notion that there are many gods, all somehow equal to Israel's Jehovah. There is an overthrow of Catholicism's world ecumenical communion and of its notion of offering itself as the grand umbrella for all religions, with its view of conversion by eventual absorption. This is very much the politics of empire, but it is a kind of socialism that does not produce the depth of love and faith that Christ seeks from his church. It produces a church that is political and, in fact, brutal, and which has already revealed itself to all through the Dark and Middle Ages. Catholicism and its grand empire will be overthrown together. The alliance of Catholic Church with World Council of Churches will fail. The alliance of Christianity with other religions will fail. And all such alliances will become those bundles that Jesus says the angels will gather and throw into the fire. The fall of Babylon in Revelation 18 and into the first part of chapter 19 indicates the destruction of both the world's nations and of their philosophical systems. Thus the spirit of the new Babylon, the first beast, is the spirit of the New World Order and its global economy and power. Although in Revelation 13 the first beast is really the first apocalyptic beast, the one having 10 horns and 7 heads, these words also echo an expression found in Daniel 7. In Daniel 7 the words first beast spoke specifically of the kingdom of Babylon. Both the original Babylon and apocalyptic Babylon are the first beast. But who exactly in the modern day could this first beast be? America is clearly a very central country in this new international order and is often identified as Babylon all on its own. It has already been shown that American politics is strongly controlled by an Illuminati-based shadow government, which, at a spiritual and symbolic level, is working steadily on a project to resurrect ancient Egyptian religious beliefs in a modern setting. There is a strong thread of Satanism that seems to be running right through the ranks of the ruling elite. And this is how the Illuminati, which is also a Satanist movement, exercises its control. There is even a battle at present between the New World Order-aligned Socialist Pope Francis I and the New World Order-shunning capitalist President Trump. In February 2017, the Pope fired the head of the Knights of Malta. He overruled when the Knights of Malta aligned behind Trump. The Pope also banned all Freemasons from the Knights of Malta, attempting to excise all Trump support from within that order.
January 21, 2017. Pope Francis orders all Freemasons expelled after Knights of Malta surround President Trump. An Extraordinary Security Council (SC) report circulating in the Kremlin today states that an ongoing schism in the Roman Catholic Church has now reached full civil war status after the Order of Malta, Knights of Malta, leader in the U.S., Cardinal Timothy Dolan, shockingly presided over the inauguration prayer ceremony, the most elaborate in American history, yesterday of President Donald Trump by reading scriptures from the Freemasons' most holy book called the Wisdom of Solomon, immediately after which, Pope Francis ordered all Freemasons to be expelled from the church. According to this report, on February 18, 2016, Pope Francis publicly declared that Trump was not a Christian in order to influence the American election, thus leading the Security Council, on February 28, 2016, to stunningly reveal that then New York City billionaire Donald Trump was the leader of the Freemasonic forces retaking control of America to coincide with the 300th anniversary of their main lodge's founding in London on June 24, 1717, and whose members actually created the United States. With Freemason Trump winning the U.S. presidency, however, this report continues, Pope Francis discovered that, at least, 34 of the highest-ranking Order of Malta members in this U.S., as well as other highly ranked Roman Catholic Church officials, had supported America's new leader in his historic victory over the apostate Hillary Clinton, thus leading Pope Francis to order Cardinal Raymond Burke, November 2016, to clean out all of the Freemasons found in the Order of Malta, and a month later, December 2016, his creating of a commission to investigate everyone in the Order of Malta too. In what has been characterized as an extraordinary rebuke, however, this report notes, the Order of Malta in response to Pope Francis told him to stay out of their affairs, with Cardinal Burke further threatening Pope Francis with a formal act of correction if the pontiff, in essence, didn't back off. Most feared by Pope Francis about the Freemason forces being led by President Trump, this report explains, is how quickly they have ravaged the demonic globalization agenda the pontiff has long supported, and whose victories include the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, Brexit, Trump's victory in the U.S., and these Freemason forces now flooding back across the Atlantic to recapture France, and whose people, unlike those in America, still greatly fear these Freemason forces with their knowing of their true power and might. With Britain still struggling to comprehend a secret archive listing over 2 million Freemasons that reveals how their nation has been completely controlled by these forces since, at least, 1733, and will require a rewrite of their entire history, this report continues, it's including the secret Freemason membership of Prime Minister Winston Churchill is especially to be noted due to his grandsons, Winston Churchill Jr., being Freemason member too. As to why British Freemason leader Winston Churchill Jr. is to be particularly noted, this report explains, is due to his lifelong friendship with the American Freemason financier David Koch, who with his brother Charles Koch, and their private global corporate giant Koch Industries, have for decades not sought personal political power, but have, instead, laid the groundwork for their Freemason leader President Trump to retake control of the U.S., and whose secretive actions have been described as that even when Obama became president in 2009, it was just a blip on a master plan measured in decades, not election cycles. Astonishingly, though, this report says, the American people's ability to comprehend the truth of these Freemasonic forces now being led by President Trump. WikiLeaks was warned about this past year, and as revealed in the release of Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman John Podesta's emails, one of which written by Bill Ivey, chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, NE, correctly predicted that Clinton could be defeated because these peoples were beginning to awaken from the brainwashing they'd long been subjected to, and who wrote, I'm certain the poll-directed insiders are sure things will default to policy as soon as the conventions are over, but I think not. And as I've mentioned, we've all been quite content to demean government, drop civics and in general conspire to produce an unaware and compliant citizenry. The unawareness remains strong but compliance is obviously fading rapidly. To how actually strong the unawareness of the American people is right now in their failing to see, or comprehend, what these Freemasonic forces are doing, and whom they are fighting, this report says, was shockingly portrayed in a 2015 study conducted by Microsoft that revealed the average U.S. person's attention is down to 8 seconds, which is less than that of a goldfish. But as to the compliance of them obviously fading rapidly, this report continues, is due to a growing mass of these American people failing to succumb to the virtual avalanche of propaganda being thrown at them by their fake news mainstream media generated by the over 213 George Soros-funded organizations, including the main, central one called the Shadow Party supporting the Bush-Clinton crime families, and that has already begun the process to impeach from office President Trump. As President Trump will today confront the CIA-led deep state coup against his Freemason forces attempting to retake control of a ravaged America, and though the outcome of this war remains uncertain, this report concludes, Pope Francis and his demonic globalist allies may, indeed, have met their match, and unlike what occurred at dawn on Friday, October 13, 1307, when these modern Freemasons Brothers of Solomon, known in the West as the Knights Templar, were eradicated by the Roman Catholic Church, it may not be as easy this time around. Special message from Sister Sayers, though age has dimmed my eyesight, It has not affected my mind, and as a young 18-year-old year novice in 1936, I remember well my distributing our Sorgefall pamphlets in my small German village of Remagen, warning of the strange and satanic rituals being performed by many of our military and political leaders. No one would believe such outlandish things as they were impossible to imagine, just like this report is, and the others below are too. So please let me advise you that just because a thing is too astonishing to believe, it does not make it untrue. My country learned this lesson much too late, yours doesn't have to. January 26, 2017. Pope orders Knights of Malta destroyed for loyalty to Trump after CIA spies arrested in Russia. In what can only be described as one of the most significant historical events to occur in over 700 years, since 1305, when Pope Clement V ordered the annihilation of the Knights Templar, a new Security Council (SC) report circulating in the Kremlin today states that Pope Francis has, likewise, ordered the total and complete destruction of the Order of Malta, Knights of Malta, just hours after the Federal Security Service, FSB, formally announced that it had captured and arrested for treason two U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, linked spies, who under the co-direction of the CIA and Vatican, created the Russia won the election myth to discredit the legitimacy of Freemason leader President Donald Trump. According to this report, and as we've previously reported on, this full-blown civil war between the two oldest and most prominent sovereign entities in the Western world has left the international legitimacy of the Knights of Malta in ruins, with its constitutional integrity and diplomatic standing now seemingly beyond repair, and that was caused by the Knights of Malta secretly supporting Freemason leader Trump, including their spiritual anointment of this new U.S. president during his 20 January inauguration by the American Knights of Malta leader Cardinal Timothy Dolan. With Pope Francis ordering the Knights of Malta to expel all Freemasons from their ranks for their having supported Trump, this report continues, the Knights of Malta fired back at the pontiff in what is described as an extraordinary rebuke, ordering the Vatican to stay out of its affairs, and to which Pope Francis then responded by firing the International Knights of Malta leader Grand Master Fra Matthew Festing. Angering the Knights of Malta against Pope Francis, this report explains, was the Vatican being complicit with the CIA in the arrest of two Freemason spies who uncovered the many links between Hillary Clinton, George Soros and other globalist factions seeking to destroy Freemason leader Trump. Though these two Freemason spies arrested in Italy under the direction of the Vatican and CIA are now in black custody, this report notes, immediately prior to their being captured they were able to electronically transmit information they had obtained on the plot to destroy Freemason leader Trump to the Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, who in turn joined with the FSB and created an intelligence operation that captured the CIA, causing the 13 January cyber attack on Washington, D.C. that they intended to blame on Russia. Along with this joint SVR-FSB intelligence operation uncovering the CIA plot to launch a cyber attack upon their own nation, this report continues, it also unmasked two CIA-paid operatives who were, also, working on this plot to destroy Freemason leader Trump by the creation of the Russia won the U.S. election myth Ruslan Stoyanov, the head of Kaspersky Labs Investigations Unit, and Sergei Mikhailov, a division head of the FSB, both of whom are now under arrest and charged with committing the grave crime of treason against the Federation. Upon Pope Francis learning that two of his CIA Vatican spies were arrested in Moscow, this report says, his demonic anger became so great he ordered the destruction of Knights of Malta for their supporting of Freemason leader Trump, and thus causing other high-ranking Catholic Church officials to warn the pontiff that, if the Holy See can so brazenly insert itself into the internal governance of another sovereign entity whose legitimacy stems from a mutual agreement under international law, it now has no legal defense should another sovereign body, say the government of the Italian Republic, choose to view the independence of the Holy See as a similarly anachronistic formality. Most critical to note about this historic civil war, this report explains, is that it has pitted the demonic Antichrist globalist forces led by Pope Francis against the Freemasonic nation-state forces led by President Donald Trump, and whose combined Knights Templar Freemasonic alliance master plan is to retake control of America, and hence the world, by June 24, 2017, which is the 300th year founding of the Freemasonic Lodge in London that not only created the United States during the American Revolution, but, also, destroyed France's monarchy during French Revolution too. Aiding Freemason leader President Trump in his force's bid to retake control of America, this report continues, is the United Kingdom, whose citizens are still in shock after the CIA released a stunning list prior to the US presidential election of over 2 million secret Freemason members in Britain, showing how they have totally controlled that nation since, at least, 1733. So powerful, in fact, have the Freemasonic forces in Britain become, this report notes, they masterminded their nation's exit from the European Union, Brexit, just prior to Trump becoming president in a bid to join Freemason forces in UK with those in the US, and that Prime Minister Theresa May officially began today by her stunningly publishing the bill allowing her government to trigger Article 50, the formal process for leaving the EU, and just hours before she meets with President Trump. Also to note, this report says, is that Freemason leader President Trump prior to his meeting with Prime Minister May has launched another attack against Pope Francis by telling the Vatican globalist supporting Mexican President Enrique Pena Nieto that unless his Catholic nation pays for the border wall, Trump will refuse to meet him. With Freemason leader President Trump using his new alliance with Prime Minister May to further drive a wedge into a fractured Europe, this report continues. Security Council intelligence analysts are agreeing with U.S. experts saying that the Trump-May combination of power is beginning to resemble that of the 1980s alliance between President Ronald Reagan and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The most critical aspect of the Freemasonic forces led by Reagan-Thatcher to be noted, this report explains, was the combining of their forces to stop the CIA globalist-led plot allowing Argentina to invade the sovereign British territory called the Falkland Islands and imprison then relocate all their UK citizens to Scotland, but that President Reagan ordered the US military to stop, including his secret agreement with Britain to loan them a powerful American warship if their aircraft carrier was lost during the war. Unlike in Europe, especially France, where Freemasons' forces are feared, this report concludes, in American today this nation's citizens have absolutely no idea of this historic war going on all around them, but that cannot be said of their ancestors, who in 1828 formed the anti-Masonic Party to stop them from taking power, but who just a year later, in 1829, were totally defeated by Freemason forces loyal to America's first Grand Master President Andrew Jackson, and whose portrait Freemason leader President Trump ordered immediately installed in the White House Oval Office upon his taking power.
It is also now coming out that most of the presidents of America since World War II have been heavily involved in pedophilia and homosexuality, and perhaps this practice goes back for many years before. And some have even been involved in relationships with transsexuals. Sexually deviant behavior is now rampant among America's military leaders, who also exclusively promote their underlings to positions of military leadership only if they get involved in and stay quiet about their homosexual practices and about the perverse sexual practices of their fellows. Breaking the oath leads to death. Thus, America is very much a modern Sodom, but much of it is still hidden from the general view. In general, it would be true that America, like Babylon, reigns over the kings of the earth, which we see in Revelation 17:18 of Babylon, and is a queen among nations and the lady of kingdoms. See Isaiah 47 verses 5 and 7. The United Nations, some might argue, is really the one that reigns over all the kings of the earth, and yet one should note that it is situated in New York City and is in reality heavily influenced by America. As a military power, America has been, and continues to be, the hammer of the whole earth. Jeremiah 50 verse 23. America, like ancient Babylon, is a nation made great by people who have immigrated from all parts of the world. Her power and wealth have for a long time made her the praise of the entire earth. Again quoting Jeremiah, and an astonishment among the nations, Jeremiah 51:47. Also, the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies, Revelation 18:3. The American dollar is still the chief exchange currency in the world. Now, the list of 30 items traded by Babylon in Revelation 18 represents all, that is 3, of the produce of the nations 10. So 3 times 10 is 30. But note that different Greek versions lose one or another of these items in their lists, but the full list would contain 30 items, and the pattern of their arrangement is shown here, 442, 424, 244. As we see, thy merchants were the great men of the earth, and for by their sorceries were all nations deceived, Revelation 18:23. In accordance with Isaiah 47:13, the Federal Reserve Bank, financial and investment brokers, and stock market specialists are the modern-day equivalent of the astrologers and monthly prognosticators of Babylon. America's financial controllers include the most powerful men on earth. These men use financial sorceries like bailouts, stock and bond bubbles, quantitative easing, and a national debt that tops $18 trillion, and entice citizens to invest their money in stocks and bonds to raise their value for their own exploitation. All of its wealth and power make the United States proud and arrogant, especially as the prophets foretold. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, for she says in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow, Revelation 18:7. Isaiah 47:10 says, you have trusted in your wickedness, and have said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and knowledge mislead you, when you say to yourself, I am, and there is none besides me. Now, New York is also the great city where you can see the Statue of Liberty, but it is not the liberty we might imagine. Originally, America was founded by Puritans who escaped Europe to obtain liberty from Catholic clutches. In recent generations, this liberty is the freedom to live in a nation that is free of dictatorial rule. Now, as it happens, Libertas in Latin, or liberty in English, is the name of the ancient Roman goddess of personal freedom, especially in sexual matters. Libertas was already referred to as the mother of harlots by the famous Roman historian and senator Cicero, and she is considered to be the matron goddess of prostitution. This is exactly why, when they saw this gigantic statue of Libertas in New York Harbor, the Christian prophets originally called it the Whore of Babylon. But America has chosen to keep it as the emblem of freedom. It can certainly be said that America is probably the central player, along with the Vatican, which is trying to unite all religions, in leading the world into a single corporatized entity and a new, and shall we say, Babylonian world order. She is like the capital, the chief center of this global empire. Both Washington, D.C. and the Vatican have the Egyptian obelisks standing in their courtyards. This obelisk is a reference to the phallus of Osiris, from which the seed of the mystery religions has sprung. And yet, even if America is the capital of this global Babylon, there are still questions about who is really running America at the moment. Given that the name Babylon is also written across the head of the harlot who sits upon the beast in Revelation 17, we should consider the mystery of the woman and the beast. So who are the woman and the beast in Revelation 17? The beast, based upon its physical description, is a compendium of political and religious entities. It incorporates the Babylonian mystery schools, Catholicism and Papism, in one branch. It incorporates the World Council of Churches. It incorporates the Illuminati and Freemasonry, and basically secret societies. It incorporates Kabbalistic and Bolshevik Judaism and Fascism. It incorporates Islam and Rabbinic Judaism. It incorporates the United States military-industrial complex. And it incorporates the United Nations. These seven could very well be its seven heads in the modern day. There may be other entities in the New World Order, but these would probably find their public face behind one of the seven listed above. In short, the beast represents the complete and multifaceted spiritual apostasy of mankind, which, in pursuit of its goals, stands in direct opposition to the kingdom of God that Christ has ordered his church to establish in the world. In conclusion, then, the woman who rides upon the apocalyptic beast can best be summed up as the dragon-inspired spirit of wickedness that is seeking to replace the kingdom of God with a satanically inspired humanistic utopia that drives out the knowledge of Jehovah from the minds of men. And therewith we end today's study. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we're going to continue with the Tale of Two Apocalyptic Cities, Part 2, next week in a session of around about 75 to 80 minutes to finish this part out. Hope we'll see you then. Today, though, we still have a bit of time for questions, so if you have some questions, feel free to ask them in a few minutes' time. But before that, we'll just have a wee break. But I hope you enjoyed it. For those who are going early, thanks again for coming, and we'll see you again next week.